Obviously, I have two things on the agenda today that I'd like to speak to, and they both relate to the winter storm, not tropical storm, winter storm Elliott, that caused us to, the polar vortex or the polar bomb that came in and affected us. And first, I'll start with the load curtailment event, which is what we were talking about. So, as you're aware, on the 23rd and 24th, the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, ordered everyone, all 153 local power companies in the 7-state area to reduce load by 5% on December 23rd, and then on December 24th by 5%, and then increased it to 10% on Saturday the 24th. They issued that directive as a direct result of insufficient generation that we just talked about to cover what was historic demand because of the single-digit temperatures that covered much of the South. The emergency orders that were issued were a result of loss of generation in the TVA portfolio on Friday morning. TVA essentially lost thousands of megawatts of generation capacity as multiple units failed. Those include some natural gas units and some coal fire units for some situations of cold protection that were inadequate to the task of the very cold temperatures. Also, there was the inability to secure power from outside the TVA system because of the broad-ranging nature of this storm. So we lost generation and we could not bring power into the TVA system. And that loss of generation, that lack of ability to import power, was insufficient to meet the demand and caused the load curtailment mandate for the first time in the 89-year history. So the contract that MLGW has and every local power company has with TVA, regardless of the length of that contract, mandates that we include an emergency load curtailment plan as part of what we do. The reason you have that is to ensure grid stability through the bulk electric system. The bulk electric system is the nation's power grid. And if you want an example of what happens when you don't protect that grid, you can hearken back to what happened in ERCOT several years ago, where they had very deep and long duration outages because of lack of protection of the grid. Everybody is required, all 153 power companies, to adhere to the ELCP. And these notices can come, as you saw, with little advance warning because of increasing demand and generation assets. I'll talk a little bit about the timeline so that you can understand how we receive this information. Then I'll talk about the process so you can get there. So as the storm was coming in, our crews prepared for the impending weather. We placed restoration crews on standby. We reviewed all of our emergency operating procedures. And then on the afternoon of December 22nd, we actually activated our electrical crisis action team, which puts into motion a formal approach to responding to any outages that we have. And we did that because the temperatures began to precipitously drop on Thursday afternoon. By that evening, they got down to the single digits, and we were already experiencing gusty winds and some intermittent outages. On Friday, December 23rd, our electrical crisis action team was conducting our morning meeting at 9 in the morning. We met at 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, lots of individual meetings between them, but those were our big updates. And we were coordinating at that time the restoration of customers who had lost power because of the impacts of the storm. There were several thousand customers without power at that time. And then during that meeting is when we got our first notification that TVA was moving to step 40, which is a contractual reduction in electrical power by some of the top users in a system. As we were discussing that, at 9:31, TVA issued for the very first time in its history a step 50 emergency load curtailment plan. That happened at 9:31 in the morning while we were on our morning meeting. And that meant that we had to immediately reduce our electrical load by 5%. And so our folks at System Operations set about the plan. They pulled the plan off the shelf, put into place the electrical load curtailment plan that we had of 5%, and began disrupting power. Now I'll talk about how we do that in the rolling blackout process in just a minute, but that order remained in effect until 11:43, so a couple of hours on the morning of the 23rd. As we curtailed that, about noon, we had a press briefing to talk about what happened. that afternoon, the logical question is, could this happen again? And we were advised late in the day on Thursday afternoon that yes, as a matter of fact, on Friday morning, you should expect as that morning peak occurs that we could again have to go into the emergency load curtailment program. The forecast was that we were going to do that at about 7:30 in the morning. But as things would happen, the peak actually hit early, and at 4:51 a.m. local time, TVA ordered a 5% load curtailment. 20 minutes later, they ordered that to be raised to 10%. That is a significant change in the way in which we operate, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. So it's pretty aggressive, and we had to take immediate action. And because we had to move to 10%, that meant many more people across a much more broad area were impacted by the rolling blackouts. And in fact, it meant that some customers, though it wasn't our intent, actually experienced back-to-back rolling blackouts when our original plan was to go from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood. When you go to the 10% plan, we went right back to the beginning and started executing in that way because that's how the 10% plan is presented. You typically don't expect to go from 5 to 10. So let me talk about how the process works. We are required to intermittently interrupt power according to our plan, and just enough to get down to the 5% or the 10% that is ordered. Everybody is required to do that because I said preserving the grid is the most important thing to prevent a much larger and much deeper problem. It is not a great option, but it is the option that we have to protect the grid. When we do this, our team at the System Operations Center, we remotely interrupt power. So at System Operations, we interrupt and then restore power to a preset number of circuits. There are hundreds of circuits that make up our system, and our team selects just those circuits according to our plan to interrupt power, and then restores the power and interrupts power to another set of circuits. They work very hard to make sure they're not interrupting circuits to hospitals, 911 call centers, or wastewater treatment plants. That is not perfect. We will look to make corrections where and when we see those issues occurring. Also, our plan was for those blackouts to last for 30 minutes for each customer and then to be restored. On average, the blackouts lasted for 1 hour for all of our customers, and some customers experienced a longer outage time. The increased outage, the average, was caused by two things. Number one, the shift from 5% to 10% meant we were underway executing the 5% plan, and then we had to start executing the 10% plan, and that takes a little bit of time for us to shift over to the 10% plan midstream. Second, you'll remember that I said we implement this remotely from our System Operations Center, and it works incredibly well when we are interrupting your power remotely. But when we place the order for that power to be restored, about 70% of the time, our substation circuit breakers operated normally and restored the power. About 30% of the time, they did not operate properly, which meant that we had to identify that that circuit breaker did not operate, dispatch a crew to go to the substation, and manually reset that circuit breaker so the power could be restored. Obviously, people who are on that circuit are going to experience longer than a 30-minute interruption while we identify, dispatch, and reset that circuit breaker. Now, we'll dig into why that didn't happen. We believe that due to the extreme temperatures, this is a mechanical, electrical, pneumatic system. We'll take a look at those and see if there's something we can do to make sure that they're more reliable in their restoration. I will say that executing a rolling blackout plan would have been challenging in the most ideal conditions with plenty of warning, but that was not the case as we went through this a week ago. This is the first time in our 89-year history we've ever had to do it, and we had to do it with very little warning. Because of the Arctic bomb cyclone that we were experiencing, we already had several thousand customers who were without power, which complicated the matter. And our crews were out there working in single-digit temperatures with sub-zero wind chills for days to restore power to individuals. Obviously, timing is everything, and this occurred on a holiday. And though we had a full complement of crews on standby, there were a significant amount of staff who had already departed for regular holidays, and it was just difficult to get the full complement of crews because some folks were already on holiday. I understand how challenging this is and how much this impacted families across our customer service base. And I understand, especially given the timing. From the start of the events on the 23rd of December and between the effects of the storm and the rolling blackouts, more than 260,000 of our customers experienced an outage of some duration. And the high number of outages at any one time was 75,000. Now, the logical question is, well, Doug, that's way more than 10%. That's right. As we roll through the rolling blackout between the storm outages we already had, we're executing the 10% and 5% plan. And as those circuit breakers are not coming back on, clearly there's going to be, we went right to the next group, put them into outage, and then we're trying to restore that group that we just had an outage on. That's why that number peaked at 75. We should have normally been down around 50,000. While we can always do better, and we are making big investments to make sure that our system is much more reliable, obviously for the outages that were impacted because of the storm. I do want to report that because our teams worked so hard, by midnight on Christmas Eve, we were down to 30 outages, and those were individual addresses that were out. And just for context, this storm affected so many cities around the South, and other cities did not enjoy that same restoration. There were other large cities in the South that still had thousands of customers who were without power going into Christmas morning. And so just for context, our team worked very hard to make sure we got that power back on as quickly as we could. As you just heard one of our customers talk about, communication is one of the most frustrating parts of this event. And it's not just communication with most of our customers, it's communication between TVA and MLGW and our customers. And admittedly, we were reactive with the rolling blackouts. And we can do better when we have more heads up. We did use, as I just talked about, a lot of the media outlets, and I won't reiterate how we did that, but we will look at every avenue where we can do better with communication. In the middle of the crisis, something we have never done before, we also tried to publish the rolling blackout plan. So after the morning of the 23rd, and when we experienced the rolling blackouts, as soon as we got the notification that there was going to be blackouts on the 24th, we published the rolling blackout plan. We were told to expect 5%. We posted the 5% plan on our website. We sent information out via social media, emails, texts, and the evening letter that I penned and sent out to everyone via all media outlets and said, here's the plan. We expect it to be implemented tomorrow morning. There are 9 groups of neighborhoods. We ended with group 2. We'll start with group 3 tomorrow. And you can look up and see at least where your neighborhood is. And then you should know 30 minutes after we start when your neighborhood comes. That was a very coarse and rough approximation of how we could do it. Certainly not ideal, but that is what we came up with during the course of the event. As luck would have it, at 4:51 in the morning, we began executing that plan. As I said, 20 minutes later, we went to a 10%, and that plan that we just published went out the window. I understand that caused frustration. People were like, my neighborhood isn't even on the list. Well, the 10% list is a much broader swath of our community. So we will work on that. We will talk about in the future how we can make people aware of what happens. We hope to never have rolling blackouts again, but if we ever do, we should be prepared to tell people what to expect at what level, and at least give you a resource. So in the days since this has occurred, there has been a lot of look back at opportunities for improvement. TVA is doing that. You've heard that FERC and NERC are working together to take a look at all of the systems, not just TVA, because many other systems suffered these very same issues. We are going to participate with TVA in an after action review to determine how we can better plan, prepare, and communicate across the entire system. We have members of our team who will be going to meet in person. There will be an action plan that comes out after that, as was requested. And so we'll also be doing our internal after action review here at MLGW to determine what we can do together. One of the critical things I've asked the team is to take a look at our way forward plan. Did this event highlight anything that was a gap in our plan for investment? let's take a look at those circuit breakers. Was that something that was in the plan and something that could be remedied through the way forward plan, as an example? I'm not suggesting it is, but that's an example of something we'll take a look at. And are there any additional infrastructure investments we need to make, both to improve day-to-day reliability, what we do have at a storm like this, and then obviously our overall efficient operations? So with that, I'll stop and take additional questions you have about the electrical load curtailment.
Commissioner, Carl, you want to start again?
Yeah, I'll start. Number one, thank you, Mr. President. That was a very comprehensive overview of the operation and what took place. So I noted three things. One was communication. We talked a lot about that, and kind of go back to Commissioner Pache's question about text messaging. Text messaging is, to me, it's sort of like online banking. I mean, there's so much you can do, but the consumer, the customer has to sign up, because you can't intrude and say, we're going to send you a text. So that communication has to be through our marketing, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know how to do this. The other thing that I noted was your TVA collaboration and communication. I love the fact that you have a plan to work with TVA. So even if this happens and occurs again, that there is some type of formal process in place where we can address it and then communicate out to the customers. I mean, communication. Whether we can prevent it or not, I think you've said it 10 or 15 times now. It's just how we communicate. I'll make a note here. The first time in my history of being a ratepayer that I saw a message from TVA publicly that this was an issue, it was a problem, it was not just MLGW. This is a partnership that we talked about the last time we met when we voted to stay with TVA, is that we have a better communication and collaboration with them. So I'm very, very pleased to hear that. And then my last question or point is, when we got to the point to return, there was only a 70% effective rate, because it could be old technology, it could be old system, et cetera, where we had to send crews out to manually switch back on versus using technology. And I'm glad to see that we're addressing that. So with that, I mean, I think you answered all of my questions.
Mike?
Yeah, I think it's very good. And I commend the workforce, MLGW crews went over and above. I love the going back and looking at the mission, going back and I'm big in our business of lessons learned. Nobody can anticipate what happened. Things that we talked about, a failure in some switches. Question I have, were those the new switches, the automatic, or do we have a failure? And I think somebody at TVA said this was once in a generation storm. Well, okay, I don't know about that, but nothing, like I said before, comes without a cost. If we want it to be Arctic conditions, everything we buy, we're going to pay a healthy price tag for that. So we got to be reasonable in that. And I, like I said, I applaud all the workers that got out there. I was outside for about 2 minutes. That was enough for me. That was brutal, those nights. I've hired somebody to go walk the dog, so it wasn't he was on his own most of those 2 nights. So thank you all for what you did. It was good.
Yeah, I echo what Commissioner Pullman said. The leadership was phenomenal. There's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks out there, and don't let that get in the way of the great job you guys did. I went to the office on the 23rd, so I went straight down Poplar Avenue for 10 miles. I saw our trucks rolling, our people working, when there are other people that wouldn't even think about getting out in it. So we did a great job with what we were dealt with. I just want to thank you personally. So good work to everybody.
Sure.
I would not have wanted to do that without Doug. I'm not trying to press you or buy favor or anything along those lines. But looking back on this, I would not have wanted to go through this without you in leadership. Someone who knew the city, who knew the systems, the employees, who had already gone through a disaster with this city. Imagine someone new to our city, having to choose neighborhoods to go through blackouts and where those neighborhoods were. I would not have wanted to do it without you. So I appreciate your leadership. It was also exceptional seeing you, not just getting an email or a text message. That was exceptional knowing at noon I was going to see you. It was very comforting. And I appreciate that. You too have a family. You too had the holidays. I appreciate you and your team and the city's team. And I don't want that to go unrecognized. Also, one of the things that I've suggested many times from this dais is that we hold TVA's feet to the fire. When there's something that goes wrong, it is a partnership, and many times it's not, as everyone says, oh, MLGW this, MLGW that. We need to, force TVA to put out a press release, a message as well. And that is what happened this time. And I think it made a world of difference with our customers, knowing that it wasn't something that MLGW did. And I really appreciate that. And finally, if you go to TJ Maxx, for example, and when you check out at the counter, they'll say, would you like to open a TJ Maxx account and save 10% on your purchase? Every time, every checkout, every cashier, every single time. So I suggest some type of my account every time we communicate with the customer on every front. We have some reason to say to them, thank you. Would you like to save 10% or something along those lines with the My Account system? Some type of marketing approach. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. One thing I do want to mention on communication, I failed to mention, and for the general public, it's probably not something they would see, but I also daily, sometimes twice or three times a day, had all of the municipal mayors either on a phone call or a text chain to make sure that all of our customers across the entire service area were aware and that their leadership was aware of what was happening. And so I think that was important. We had good feedback. We had a good dialogue with all of those leaders, and I just appreciate all of their support and attention, because it's not lost on us that we need all of the leadership to come together when we have something like this. So I want to thank all of the mayors who came together from the county to the city of Memphis to all of our municipal mayors who were a part of this process.
So Doug, I have just a question and statement. Basically, I want to echo what everyone else has said. Your team did a great job. We appreciate you. And the temperatures were brutal, as mentioned. And I'm sure none of us wanted to get out and do the job that the team had to do. So we really appreciate that. But with what we experienced in this over the last couple of weeks, short term, what is it that you see, just one thing that you would do different, or you would have the team do different, or you would execute different than you did initially?
Okay, so that's a good question. Well, in hindsight, if we had known that the rolling blackouts were a possibility, we would have had a pointer for communities to know, here's where you can find out about how we do it. Because many people, I thought when we put the plan out, I thought, well, we're going to do this, not sure how many people would read it. I know how many people read the plan because they said, wait a minute, my neighborhood's not in the plan and my power's out. So I would have had certainly a resource for communities to say, and much more well-informed, here is how this works. Here's the process by which we go through it. Here is your neighborhood and what your group you're in. So when we say we're at load curtailment 10, here's the groups, here's the plan, and here's where we'll start, and here's where we'll end. And I think what I heard from most people was, I understand the need to do it, but I sure would like a heads up about when it's going to happen. So that's the one thing I can immediately point to. And I think that's something we can do going forward. If this ever, and I would rather plan for the worst and hope for the best, that we never have to do it again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I probably got more calls about, I'm getting ready to cook Christmas dinner. When's my power coming back? And,
I did have
you just
Commissioner,
it couldn't have been a more perfect storm of timing.
I had a lot of
for it to happen.
requests from lots of organizations to please not interrupt power during a Christmas Eve mass. And so I suggested that might be a good time for a candlelight service. Because we weren't that precise, but
And St. Michael's
We
experienced that.
certainly understand that. Yes, sir.
And from a retail stance, that's the biggest retail day for retailers, and to have the power go out. And when everybody's, especially, I call them the husbands, the Christmas Eve husbands. I can count on the husband's day. I'm just, okay, the Christmas Eve shoppers might rescind that.
I confess.
So it was just a perfect storm. Oh my gosh. Perfect storm.
I'm glad you showed back up.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Yes, sir. I'll have some comments after my next about the team and what I saw. But we will come back to you. It will, as we get updates, as we go through the after action internally and with TVA, we will come back to you and report out some of those lessons learned, as you said, Commissioner Pullman, and what things we might need to pivot on with our way forward plan, if any, where we might need additional investments, and certainly, as we talked about communication, those things that we can do to improve. So I'll come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
With your permission, Chairman, I'll move into the water distribution crisis.
Please do. Thank you.
So just to describe the circumstances, again, I call this a water distribution crisis because that's what it was. This is not a water availability or ability to generate. It was just ability to distribute water. Again, on the evening of December 22nd and early morning of the 23rd, much of Memphis and the United States was in single-digit temperatures because of the Arctic bomb cyclone. The wind chills well below zero with those very cold temperatures, staying below freezing for 3 days, and then not rising above freezing until Monday, the 26th, and then eventually in the 50s by the middle of the week. And that is pertinent because of the freeze-thaw cycle and when things occur. The rapid drop in those temperatures, along with the dramatic wind chills that we saw and sustained wind chills, had a significant impact on water systems, not just the water systems that MLGW operates, but also on commercial and residential domestic water systems. So water mains that we operate were affected. Fire protection systems that commercial customers have were affected, and residential domestic water systems were all affected by the deep freeze. They had frozen water pipes that eventually the water expanded, ruptured those pipes after the freeze, and then we had significant number of leaks. In all, during the days of this water distribution crisis, we identified and corrected 52 water main breaks. Not all of those happened immediately, but they scaled up as thaw started to happen. And so 52 water main breaks in all between December 23rd and 29th. In the same period, our crews responded to 3,200 customers who had made a call saying, please secure my water because I have a ruptured pipe. And we know that there are many other customers who had a ruptured pipe that did not call us. So significantly higher than those 3,000. Those are just the ones that we responded to and cut off at the meter. Lots of customers I know cut their own water off because of a thawed pipe. So that number is probably dramatically higher. And also significantly, I'll talk about this, there were 54 commercial properties that had a fire protection system that failed because of freezing, causing us to have to go cut water off at the meter because there was a lot of water coming out. And I'll talk about that volume. Many of those were in either buildings that were unoccupied just because of the holidays, or as we found out, many vacant properties that still had a fire protection system in place. So taken together, all of those ruptured water lines caused pressure to slowly drop across the system. And eventually on December 23rd, the pressure was so low in several areas, Southeast Shelby County and the northern part of the county, that we had to issue a boil water advisory for those areas because our pressure dropped below 20 pounds per square inch. By the evening of December 24th, our pressures across the entire system had dropped to a point where we had to issue that precautionary boil advisory for our entire system. Now, again, I want to emphasize, at no time did we ever discover any contaminants in the water. But by regulation, once our pressure gets below 20, there is a risk that you could have some infiltration into the system, causing some variety of adverse impact to people who consume the water. That's why it's a precautionary boil order. By December 29th, our team had repaired main breaks as they came up very quickly. And because our team was able to cut off service for so many people who were experiencing leaks, that the afternoon of the 29th, actually the morning, we had returned pressures in the system to what are normal levels. And once we reached those normal levels of pressure, we were able to collect water samples from across the county, which is our requirement to do. I think we had 80 plus samples that we collected from all across the county. Then we take them to our water laboratory where we have to test them. The testing process takes 18 hours. From the time you collect the sample, you have to essentially incubate those samples for 18 hours so that the cultures have time. If there is any kind of a bacterial culture in there, it has time to grow and we can observe it. And then once we have completed those 18 hours, as soon as we get the results, and you can bet the folks in our laboratory were watching it like watching a cake in the oven bake. When is it going to be done? As soon as the 18 hours was up, they pulled those samples, had our report ready to go, shared it with our partners at the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation because they are the ones that can review the data. And we were able to lift, with their cooperation, the boil water advisory. So there's two things that I really want to talk about as a result that were immediately evident to me as a result of this event. And the first is I want to compare this to the deep freeze because a lot of people compared this to the deep freeze that we had in February of 21. And I want to talk about how the investments that this team and this board has made a real difference. This event had sub-freezing temperatures for 3 days and we had 52 water main breaks. We had a water boil advisory for most of the city for 5 days and for some other areas of the city for 6. And we estimate that it could be as high as 15% of our customers experience some low pressure and others with no water flow at all. In February of 21, we had sub-freezing temperatures for 9 days. We had 140 water main breaks at that point. We had a boil water advisory that lasted for 8 full days. And we had much wider spread and much more longer duration, low pressure and no water conditions across the county. In 2021, our wells and our pumping stations were dramatically impacted by the deep freeze, which meant that we had at that time, not just a water distribution crisis, but we had a water generation problem as well. And they, in 2021, could not generate the additional water necessary to keep pressure in the system and flowing to customers. That resulted in some pretty critical moments for our hospitals who were in extremis, required water tankers, the fire department, all of our dialysis centers to be filled up with other tankers. It was pretty dire situation in 2021. Well, since 2020, this organization has invested more than $50 million into our water system, and much of that has been into our wells and into our pumping stations. And since 2021, when that last freeze happened, we accelerated some of those investments, and our wells and pumping stations have received substantial upgrades that prevented the same kinds of impacts that we had in 2021. Just to give you an example, at the peak of this event, we pushed out the rate of 223 million gallons of water per day. Our normal push is 120 to 140 million gallons of water, so nearly double the volume of water that we normally push out. And we increased pressure output at our pumping stations just to make sure that our downstream customers could retain some water and some pressure. That really made all the difference. Our hospitals were able to, there was one hospital who got close as opposed to the last time this happened when all of our hospitals were suffering. So that really made a big difference. It's safe to say that without the investments we've made in our wells and our pumping stations, that this would have been a much worse a much deeper crisis. So the investments you may not feel day to day, but our ability to respond was dramatically different than it was just a little over a year and a half ago. The second thing that I want to talk about in relation to this event is the high rate of fire protection system ruptures that we saw. 54 fire protection system ruptured. And when that happens, it dramatically impacts our ability to get water to our downstream customers. Again, I haven't determined how many were unoccupied because of the holidays and how many were unoccupied because they are simply vacant. But I do want to say that we have no ability to remotely detect when water is flowing there, except in a brand new system. They do have some monitoring in the brand new, but for these systems that are just even a few years old and older, we have no ability to detect. There's no meter on a fire protection system, reasonably so, because water doesn't normally flow through those systems. That means that we can't detect when there's a leak, and we're relying on the property owner or somebody who's walking or driving by to see water flowing out of a building and saying there's something wrong. And so in some cases, we know that there was water flowing for days out of some of these facilities until they were able to be detected and we were able to secure it. That is tragic for the property owner, but also has deep impacts for our distribution system. This is an area that we need to dig into. And our team has already contacted the necessary folks to bring people together, people like construction code enforcement, our fire marshals, our commercial code enforcement officials, to find out, is there something we can do that is not, a burdensome cost for property owners to remotely monitor these things? What technology is out there? Our team is already looking at some of those things. Is there a way we can solve this? Is there a manpower solution to this? When temperatures get to a certain level that you're mandated to go check your systems or something. So we're going to work on that with our local partners to see what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future. Now, it doesn't sound like it might be that impactful, 54 fire protection systems, but let me say we are a logistics heavy community and we have very large warehouse facilities. And some of these facilities are so large that they have 8 and 10-inch diameter fire protection mains. Those are very large. In some cases, those are as large as the water mains that we have in the street. But just to give a sense of perspective, remember I talk about we push out 120 to 140 million gallons a day across our entire system. An 8-inch diameter fire protection pipe can flow 2 million gallons a day. A 10-inch can flow 4 million gallons a day. That's just one. And remember, we had 54 of these across. And I'm not saying they were all that large, but just to give you a sense of how impactful these can be, they do have a pretty dramatic effect. They flow a lot of water on purpose. You want them to, you just don't want them to break and flow a lot of water. So just like with the electrical outages, we will conduct an after action review to see what we can do better. One of those items is fire protection, as I talked about. The other is what can we do in our system, and are there gaps in our way forward plan that we can address that were identified through this issue. I do want to come back and thank the MLGW team as I wrap up. As the forecast for this Arctic bomb cyclone, became clear, our team prepared to respond. And I want to say what may seem to be obvious. There are very few preemptive measures that we can take to protect our systems in the immediate days before a storm. All of those preemptive measures have to be taken through deliberate investments in our infrastructure. And sometimes, as you saw in this polar vortex, no matter what you do, it's not enough, and Mother Nature is going to have an impact. You just need to be prepared to respond. And what we can do is review our procedures, our processes, and make sure that we have the people on board to respond when we do have an impact. And I would just like to say, what a response we had. This was truly an all hands on deck evolution. Working in brutally cold temperatures, Commissioner, I know you said you're outside for 2 minutes. Most of our crews work 16-hour shifts in that weather. We work 24 hours a day. Brutally cold, sub-zero wind chills, and folks out there working on water systems in sub-freezing temperatures. They should be commended for the work that they do. As soon as we rolled into the water recovery mode, we had the very same across the board response from our team. Our gas and our safety teams were out there cutting off customers' water. Our electric team helped make sure those water plants remained operational and kept electrical power out there. Our administrative and logistics personnel, you saw them coordinating a water distribution event where they gave out 5,000 cases of water, but also they were conscripted into water main detection personnel. They were out driving around the entire service area looking for water mains that were broken, looking at commercial buildings to determine if exteriorly they could see if there was anything coming out of those things. So people who were normally day-to-day sitting in the headquarters or at an office were out in the field driving around trying to help us detect any problems so we could quickly get on there. They were essentially our water break scouts, which is a new official position we have here. You're a water break scout. Many of our available call center personnel were they stayed and worked double and triple shifts to make sure that we could answer as many calls as we could for customers. And again, I know that's an area that we are continuing to work on. But I want to say that the mantra during this whole event was by every one of our people is, what can I do to make it better for a customer or my colleague today? And then they did those things without being told, just finding the right thing to do. And that's the culture that we want to continue to advance here is what can I do to help a customer or my colleagues today? We, of course, will recognize people in the coming weeks and months more formally, but I wanted to thank people today for all of their hard work. The attitudes of the employees that were out there working were incredible, and they were out there just doing what they do. As you said, Commissioner Pesci, most of those folks will be celebrating their Christmas sometime this coming month with their family, because I know most of them didn't spend any time at home with their families. And I'm amazed at their dedication and their commitment. So I want to thank all of them for the hard work. And with that, I will close and take questions you have about the water distribution process.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? Mitch?
On the fire suppression, is that on the customer side
Yes, sir.
where the issues? I know a lot of the universities and things like that had dorms that had flooding issues.
Yes, sir.
So does a smart meter not kick in on those things?
Again, those are not metered. Fire
that's
protection
right.
systems are not
Fire
metered.
suppression's not metered.
Right, because that's an expensive proposition for a meter on a fire protection
Yep.
system.
Okay, makes sense.
So most of the bigger users do have
Warning.
systems that they're monitored, but it's privately monitored.
Gotcha.
And the new fire code calls for new construction to have a flow monitor there. But remember, we have lots of old infrastructure here with lots of either abandoned in place, but still active fire protection systems that are just have no monitoring and no human monitors either.
I recognize Commissioner Pesci.
A couple of things. The TikTok how to cut your water video paid off, even though it may have been embarrassing when you did it.
Can't take yourself too seriously.
The timing of that I thought was excellent, so that paid off. The plan to correct the sprinkler system situation, of course, is something we want to see address that. At some point, if not now, I'd like to recognize those who helped us with the tankers that came in with water, the other municipalities, the fire departments, those who came in to help us with that. And also to say that we had citizens who were water break scouts as well. I actually called our attorney because I had one show up at my house, and she called my business to ask them to ask me to come to the door. And she says, I'm in a Ring video. I'm looking at a Ring video. I think she's there. I have some leaks to tell her about. And of course, we don't actually want, our neighbors coming to our homes to tell us things like that. But I did pass that on
Sure.
to our staff. So I think the city as a whole, we had a lot of water scouts.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. It calls to mind, again, I recognize the other municipal mayors for the electrical outage and their participation. But in the water outage, we had offers from Millington and Germantown also, if they could offer us water. Unfortunately, where those connections were, we had breaks that we would have just been porting their water out into a leak as well. So, but we appreciate their participation. Appreciate, as you know, the city of Memphis provided some non-potable water solutions for people who were not able to fill their toilet tanks. And so I think that was helpful to a number of customers as well. Everybody was as creative as they could be in offering lots of support. Citizens were there. We recognize the many organizations that donated water that, you know, just sporadically. We even had a young woman from Olive Branch, Mississippi that just drove up to our Lamar site and dropped off a trunk full of cases of water because she just thought that we might need it. And so everybody from individuals to companies, we had a fraternity from Lemoyne and College that came and dropped off water. Everybody just did the right thing, and we appreciate it. And they help, you know, the other thing is to not be lost on this is, you know, I know Commissioner Dixon wants to spend some time at a hotel. Just let us know anytime you'd like to do that, sir. We'll help take care of that. But
Okay.
but other people just spend time with families. Yeah, people spend time with families and friends and neighbors to help get through this, and shouldn't be lost on us that our friends and neighbors came to the aid of most people. That's where most of the help came from.
Carl, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. Number one, thank you and your team for the leadership. This also should put emphasis on our +1 program, because not only did we have the cold weather, but utilities probably went up. So should put a lot of emphasis on our +1 programs to help our seniors and those folks help with their bills. Then the other thing is, how do we communicate to those perhaps seniors who may not have the money to afford to get their pipes fixed on the inside? I know that's not our responsibility, but I think that should all be a part of the communication. When folks call in and say, hey, you know, I'm a person who's on fixed income or a senior, et cetera, then how do we get, you know, our pipes restored on the inside? So just maybe something that we can do to support them as far as tagging other organizations that can help them in that situation.
Yes, sir.
Mike?
Good. Very
good. Just a brief statement. You mentioned, and we all know what the employees went through. You mentioned 16 to 24 hours in single digit temps. And they also asked, what can we do to help? Is there any plans? I know you said that other people will be recognized later. Is there any plan, and this is a question for you and Jackie, for an Employee Appreciation Day? I know it's a large, quite a few people. It can be done in increments by departments, whatever, but I think that will go a long ways in showing appreciation versus just saying, thanks, you did a great job.
Yes, yes, sir. We will definitely do that. I don't want to steal the thunder from Jackie and give away what we're going to do, but there will be some recognition that we do for employees that touches everyone. And then there will be some individuals who did some outstanding work and will be recognized as well individually. But for everybody who came together, we'll have a recognition in some way that I think employees will appreciate.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything else that you?
Not on those two items. I know I skipped right over our gas purchase briefing that we're going to have. So I guess if you have no questions on these two outages, we can move right into that.
Okay.